Jamf Nation. Welcome to this breakout session. A year in the life, implementing device compliance and conditional access on global scale. Please welcome Sergio Aviles and Chris Palmiotto.
Thank you. So, here we are. You all are the survivors. Right before the party, these are the diehards. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. Sergio and I are pleased to talk about the Comcast journey the last couple years and what it took to expand conditional access and compliant device. So I was the lead project manager. And so I'm a little out of my comfort zone here with all these really intelligent engineers like Serge. But it's been some years where I got to participate in the Jamf environment. And somebody talked about it earlier about the Casper Suite days. And I remember those days 10 years ago when I actually used to be a Jamf admin myself. And so we work on a lot of global projects between our enterprise IT and cyber teams. And so I'm a part of that and getting to support intelligent people like Serge.
Yeah, so I've been working at Comcast since 2009. When I first started, it was maybe about like mid 3 digits, and now we're like low 5 digits. We've been a Jamf customer since 2011, excuse me. And yeah, so I've been there for the whole ride. As a side, I also helped found the Philly Mac Admin Meetup group. And you may know me from such Slacks as the Mac Admin Slack. So, Chris.
Just to keep it social, right?
Yeah.
And Sergio definitely did his hair better than I did today, so we'll leave the hair jokes aside. So the hope today is we're going to take you through this journey and talk about some of the key objectives. You're going to see both the strategic side, the programmatic side that I get to touch, and then how we meld those things technologically, especially as we're working through different domains. So Sergio and I are part of the larger IT enterprise organization, but we work at these kind of smaller micro teams, especially on the endpoint side, and then I have the privilege of supporting our, again, larger collaborative projects. So this was across many domains. This was primarily a cybersecurity project, but with our compliant device requirement, endpoint teams, all of our MDM teams have to get involved. So working through, and I bet we could all say it at once, what's the security buzzword of the decade? Zero trust. Oh, see, it worked. So that's exactly what we were out to do. How do we restrict the endpoint? How do we enhance our cybersecurity measures and work through kind of new technologies, things that have been around, but really integrate them completely so that we have the whole experience from an endpoint management perspective. Separately, we then look at what does conditional access look like? Obviously, it's the restrictive measures that we use on the Entra side of the house in combination with all the other rule sets that we work through. And so we start looking at what does compliant mean? What is a trusted device? And how do we start to restrict the access to our enterprise applications? Everything down to M365 now becomes scrutinized. And then thirdly, that non-compliant piece. This was probably the hardest part because now we're saying, hey, that personal device, grandma's computer, it's not safe. We don't trust it anymore. And we start to close the doors to what you can access and how. So those were the 3 primary objectives that the program, our charter, if you will, looked to work through over the years of this program. So now, who doesn't love a good roadmap slide? I'm going to take you through, again, some of the kind of basics, if you will, but really these key milestones. And I'll set kind of one caveat to this. You're going to see some things that don't get represented. All this journey is focused on the Mac side, but in tandem, we were doing the Windows endpoints. We were doing our mobile endpoints. Our Linux footprint's a little different at Comcast, but there was some scoping there as well. So all the way back in 2022, this program took kind of a transition. And our first phase was kind of resetting around the discovery and planning piece of this. So this did change hands. This is when I took the reins, and everything went perfectly, of course. But we established kind of the security baseline. What are we doing? What are we restricting? How are we doing it? The who, what, when, where, how, and why. How many of us think we spend enough time in this phase of any given project? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Good or bad? We need more time, we need less time. Oh man, lots of thumbs down. What are we gonna do about it? So we obviously take everything that we're doing and we tie it into the user experience. That's the center of the Jamf experience, the center of the Mac experience. And so we spend a lot of time doing discovery. Who are our users? How do they use their Macs? How do they use all their endpoints? And what is going to be the impact to them as we built this journey together? There are a lot of parameters when we're talking about compliant device, naturally. And so we started looking, well, what is our scope? And what is the MVP, the minimal viable product? So that was when we started transitioning into 23. Then we move into the next phase of this. Okay, every little bit helps, right? So MDCA, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, is one of the first controls that we were able to launch to start to restrict that external device access. Okay, you're on grandma's computer, you're using whatever browser version from 10 years ago that's not patched. Well, we're not going to allow that anymore. And so we start applying these controls granularly, and it also started to give us some feedback about what the user experience would be. How much harder is somebody's job? What do they have to do differently? Are there workarounds? And all the while, again, we're looking at these endpoints, and we're looking at the sign-in logs, of course, with our cyber and identity partners to say, what are people accessing and how? And does it matter? Because sometimes you can accept some risk, sometimes you got to restrict it. So we looked at all of those components. And then, again, under the leadership and intelligence of Sergio and our endpoint teams, we started to look at what self-service solutions exist. So this is one thing that we're going to dive in deeper later on, so don't worry. But Compliance Monitor put the users in the driver's seat to say, okay, if I'm not compliant, how do I fix the problem? And we start to look at the operational impacts of that and how we improve that experience. So that was a huge kind of win as we moved into how we were going to get to our pilot stages. But before we do that, are we ready? So the next big chunk that we chipped away at was using Nudge, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, to look at the data and say, okay, one of our big checks is everybody on the minimum OS? And if not, how do we get them there and how do we get them there quickly? So Nudge, and working with our user communications teams, working with our endpoint teams, was one of the first big kind of burn down projects, if you will, mini projects that we worked on. And we did this with nearly 2,000 users to say, all right, how's everybody feeling? Is this going to be positive, negative? Are they going to be mad at us for popping something on their screen? And then how long does it take for them to get compliant? So this really helped us. It helped us establish data, it helped us establish experience, and then the technological side of that, of course. The next big milestone here was when we were officially ready to pilot and launch. And we're going to give you an inside look at how we do this formally. And Sergio will go through those phases. But our beta and our alphas really tell us the overall end-to-end experience from not only the user point perspective, but also our operations team and our help desk who give us all the feedback when something doesn't go well. But they let us know, hey, yeah, this is working, or this wasn't so bad. And we use that intelligence to figure out what the next step is, which of course it's, we're ready. Let's get this thing to production. Everybody gets it. So GA is our general availability. And so we take all the remaining Mac population, and in phases, we release this in waves. And so we did that through the remainder of 24 to the point where we are today, which is to say, we are now 94.5-ish compliant, and we're sustaining that. And we'll talk about some of those special populations in a minute and what that looks like. But Serge, take us through the pilot. Let's tell them how we do this with everybody. I got you.
So, at an organization our size, we can't really just deploy everyone in one fell swoop. It's just not, A, it's not practical, B, if something goes wrong, then the IT teams take the brunt of the tickets and they get very mad at you. So in order to basically space it out, we've developed like pilot phases where we just take percentages of the things and we go through that. And like the first step of that is what we call the alpha phase or dev lab phase. Essentially what that is I have like a half a dozen to maybe like 10 Macs. When we were doing this, it was a bunch of Macs on different versions of the operating system because we were still supporting like, N-2 at that point. So as well as like different pieces of hardware. So we had Intel and Apple Silicon, and so we had the lab. And we tested all these things on all the different machines to see how they would behave and how things would look different, and if they did look different. And then once we were satisfied with the initial rollout, we moved on to the next phase, which is the beta phase, which consisted of SPOCs, which is a Comcast term, which means site point of contact. These are essentially our Mac point of contacts. These are the folks in different locations around Comcast who know Macs the best, and we lean on for things to like support Macs, and also like they're our guinea pigs essentially. We push out to them, and if something happens and they come back to us, give us feedback and say, I don't think this is going to work or whatever, things like that. This is also where we have some friendlies as well. We have in a self-service the option for you to be part of our Mac testing track, which is basically people volunteer to be guinea pigs. As a caveat, we give them access to like the beta tracks of Microsoft Office apps, give them access back in the day to the OS betas. We have to do that differently now, but at one point we'd have like the beta installers available for them in self-service. So like we would give them stuff in order for us to be able to guinea pig on them. And then the next phase after that we would call phase 0, which is we would expand to the rest of the IT org and also involve other organizations at this point, whether it be security or development teams, that if we're doing something particular that had to be go to development teams, we'd go target some of their folks or all of their folks, depending on what it is at that point. And that would be the phase 0. And for each of these phases, we would allow at least 2 weeks for standard deployment for feedback and any issues that may come up. And if there was something particularly pressing or damaging or just wrong in general, we would pause the rollout to the other phase until we had resolved that issue. And after phase 0 is phase 1, which is about 10% of the population. I liberated a sort of method from that from Rich Troughton, where you use the hardware UUID to generate a number, and then you separate out the groups that way. So we do 10% of randomized Macs across the fleet, and then phase 1, that's phase 1 at 10%. Phase 2 would be an additional 30% on top of that, so we'd have 40%, and phase 3 would be GA. We'd push to the rest of the fleet at that point. And sometimes there would be special populations we need to address, like certain groups that we had excluded from the initial rollout for a particular reason. We would then go back and address those groups at that point. And Chris can move on and tell us about some of the self-service stuff we do.
Absolutely, and just to add on, one of the things about these phases have been so great as a project manager is I can build a schedule off of it. Because now we know those 2-week bake periods, I can kind of forecast out how long is it going to take us to get through these deployment phases. And then the other bit that Sergio mentioned about the survey and the feedback period, sometimes we'll put a 3rd week on that's just feedback review. What is the user experience? We might even pull in a focus group and say, hey, you 10 people were really verbose in your survey. Can you tell us more? And sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't, because they think we don't see the surveys. Microsoft Forms is not anonymous when I set them up, but and they never should be. Feedback should be honest. But we use these phases to really help plan, and it's super helpful. So we talked about earlier the kind of self-service compliance piece, and I've got some of my coworkers and our peers down here on the client services side and the endpoint support piece. So when we started to build this out and we looked at the feedback, what was it going to look like when we actually said, hey, you're broken and now you're blocked from accessing stuff? Sorry. Well, we knew we had to fix something in their experience and their journey. So this was the development of the Compliance Monitor self-service solution. So what was beautiful about this, after multiple iterations with our architecture teams and engineering, of course, to build it, was what does this link up to? How does this actually look? And it went through some iterations. You can see we landed on a 30-minute check-in, which probably sounds naggy, but it actually was 15 minutes to start. We got a little pushback on that. But hey, a SecVuln's way more naggy from security, isn't it? So we definitely wanted to make sure people could get back and working quickly, and of all the self-service solutions, this was kind of the best melding of the technologies. Some of the cool things about this UI is just Sergio built this so that every button took you somewhere. So the problem statement, hey, you're not passing this check for your minimum OS. It takes it to an internal knowledge article, tells them what steps to take if they're not sure on how to get into software update, and that was a huge help, and it prevented a ton of impact to the help desk. Because I would say literally 95% of the issues on the Mac are self-solvable. And we'll talk through all those checks that we do in a minute. So folks can run this themselves, it's automatic. All of that was helped by this development work that they put into place. So Serge, take them through kind of the technical side and how Swift Dialog plays into this.
So as Chris mentioned, I didn't write anything from scratch. It was just a script that leverages Swift Dialog, which we have installed as part of our sort of management tools package that we install with every Mac. What we can do with that is obviously, you can do a lot with that. With Swift Dialog, it's very flexible, and so be able to leverage that in order to do those things. The impetus for a compliance monitor was because traditionally device compliance with a legacy conditional access, there's no native notifications with that whatsoever. And at the time we were doing this, we required modern auth for any email access on our email stuff, and the email integration in Jamf was still basic auth at that time, and they had not come out with the new email piece for that to leverage that yet. And so the whole impetus for Compliance Monitor was that we needed to give the users notifications and figure out how to do that. We had tried different ways of setting it up through Azure and just trying to leverage email, but we instead said let's do it locally instead. And Compliance Monitor itself is just one of three things that we're actually doing in order to get information to the users. Compliance Monitor is actually just a couple of scripts that have launch agents and launch daemons that we push via package through Jamf, obviously, and the runs at its particular intervals. So Compliance Monitor is strictly concerning our checking for the status of all of our compliance policy checks locally on the machine. If anything is non-compliant and it picks it up in the next 30-minute window, it'll pop a notification for the user. The OK button will take them to self-service, either self-service or to a knowledge-based article, or in the case of SIP, to Apple developer page that tells them how to re-enable SIP. So users can solve themselves because I haven't mentioned this before, but in Windows has a 7-day grace period for compliance. But the way Jamf works is that because of device compliance integration runs on a recon, so it can be our grace period is essentially only at the maximum 24 hours before the next recon runs, if they don't run anything else that may run a recon, which would be like installing an app or rebooting the machine. So in order to address that and make sure that the users can self-solve before something like that happens, it's part of the reason why we have the check running every 30 minutes so that they can take action as soon as possible. Part of the other tools suites that we did was also we have a version of Compliance Monitor that is running in self-service. So if anybody wanted to check the current status without waiting for Compliance Monitor to run, they can go to self-service, press the button, script runs, and it shows them the complete status of everything that we're checking for. Part of the things that we've learned during rolling out is that there was additional conditions we needed to check for besides our compliance policies. These were also things like, is the registration for device compliance healthy? is are they using a supported browser that supports conditional access? And a lot of the times, the default browser was set to something other than Safari, Chrome, or Edge. And the users would get CA blocked. And until we figured out that, oh no, you have to use these in order to make sure that this works, then, that was, we added that check so that the user could see, oh, you're not using a default browser, that's why you're getting blocked. Yeah, so basically, those are the tools. The third tool that we built was something that we discovered when we were troubleshooting some of the issues around registration and compliance status as it's posted in Intra. There is no, at the time we were doing it, there was no indication in the Jamf Pro UI of what the compliance status of the device was. So, but there is with the API. So I wrote a script that would take the serial number of the machine, figure out the ID, and then look up the compliance data that's in the database via the API and present that to the user, which would show the Entra ID object of the computer as well as the device compliance status that Jamf has for that computer. And then we would go and match that computer ID, object ID in Entra, and to see what the status is. And that would help us identify the right object as opposed, because if you've done any sort of some things, one of the things you'll run into is that if you have a bad enrollment, it might create duplicate records, and so that has each record has a unique computer object ID. So we need to find the right one to see if that one had the right compliance status. And there's other stuff that we do on the back end to sort of make sure that we don't have duplicate records like that. We also made an IT version where if you log into self-service and you're part of the IT team, you get the extra option to plug in a serial number so you could look up what the compliance data that Jamf has for that particular device and match it up against Entra. It's all part of troubleshooting the issues that we saw there. Chris, take us a little more.
Did you want to touch on the Python and shell base?
Oh, yeah. So like, it's all like, so the compliance monitor is written in Python, mainly because I thought it was going to be, because I wanted to be fancy, really. But the compliance check in self-service is shell, and we use both frequently in our environment. Either Python, leverage Python mainly for like API stuff and some things that are easier to accomplish without shelling out, because we leverage the PyObject-C bridge at that point in order to do things calling native frameworks. Sometimes it's a little easier than shelling out and doing some things that way. So it's typically how we end up doing it. So yeah, now we pass it off to Chris.
And what I love about this experience, that the thought process is not just around the end user and what they're able to do, but the IT teams that are supporting them. So this took out a lot of internal process, if you will, of like, hey, somebody's in a Teams chat going, hey, can someone pull this? I can't get in the back end. I need their device ID. It fixed a lot of that noise that was going on as well. So data, as you can see, is very important to this. And again, selfishly, as a project manager who has to talk about burn down and burn up and progress and completion, not having the right data can be very problematic to our stakeholders, right? So within the Jamf dashboard that we were able to build off of all these smart groups that the team uses for deployment and patching already, we were able to kind of build out all these metrics. Obviously, everything's been obfuscated, so we can't give you all the actual numbers, but you can say in the thousands of the ones that we have to manage, we were able to break out and start to see what are the hot spots. As Sergio mentioned, browsers became a talking point in this project, and we had to start thinking about, again, the minimum OS that people have to be on, because all of that affected the downstream teams, like our procurement teams. Oh, you have a Mac that won't upgrade anymore. We got to get you a new device. So it started those conversations and helped us kind of spin up all these other little mini projects that delay timelines and add to things. But it really helped us get to a point where when we went GA, general availability, we were ready and confident to do so. So we looked at all these different areas. We were able to also educate differently. All of our technical knowledge articles got refreshed. All of our operations teams got retrained. So they understood how to triage and support and self-serve as much as possible. And the reduction in the tickets that we saw out of this was immense. Because again, we were able to figure out where we need support. Serge, talk to me about the smart groups and kind of the extension build out behind the curtain there.
So if you've looked at device compliance integration, you know that when you're setting up the app integration in Entra, it requires a smart group for you to target as the compliant max group. So prior to this, I had sat in on a session at the San Diego JNUC with Sean Rabbit and I think someone from Microsoft whose name escapes me. And the idea that I took away from that was basically building a negative smart group, like not building the smart group for not what it includes, but for it doesn't include. So we built out the smart group so that the criteria was we used the operator not member of a lot, so not member of SIP non-compliant, not member of OS not compliant, you know, and so that everything that wasn't in those groups would be automatically compliant at that point. And with that, as we went through this whole journey and found other things, sometimes we had to write extension attributes to do tracking things like device registration status, since that wasn't, when the time we started this, it wasn't something that was built into Jamf Pro at that time, so we had to write extension attributes to read those values, and other things like we had to check the default browser. We had to write an extension attribute for that to see which browsers folks were using. And other things as well as we came up, as they came up. So, and all of those groups and the data and if you add the smart group to the dashboard, you get the nice graph. And that graph, it became his dashboard for tracking this entire project.
This is it. This was the screenshot. The other piece of this too, when we were looking at kind of user experience, a lot of these things were just education. Frankly, we were able to do very targeted campaigns to these people to say, hey, your Mac's not registered, and in a couple months, we're going to be rolling out this new security thing that you're not going to work with very well. So we got to have people take those steps early to, again, reduce risk, really improve the health overall. How many people are following the CIS standards? Secure configs or hardening? Mm-hmm. Yeah, good, about 75%. That was the other groundwork that was laid sort of behind the scenes and for the past few years. Every year working with our cyber GRC, all of this stuff like firewall, we enforce. So we knew, oh, hey, we still have a little population of people who aren't getting these. That we need to look at. And so the team from the engineering side could analyze, is it failed policies? Is it something we need IT to put their hands on? So all of this data naturally influences the direction of any big hybrid complex program like this was. So with all that, what did we learn after felt like longer, but two solid years? It really breaks down to the three things that you've already heard, but I want to make sure you take away. Self-service and automation are critical. There are too many devices now, there are too many things all over the place to just expect it's going to work, right? We have to let the users have a little of that shadow IT flavor back and let them feel in control. And by having those self-service options, it allowed us to scale very quickly. Secondly, data. Data. Everybody loves data. Dashboards, reports. I lost my mind in Excel for 2 years, pivot tables every week. But I was able to pull all that from Jamf, and I was able to visualize it and build out executive summaries and tell the team, where are they? How are we doing? We do work in a hybrid, agile, waterfall, like many people, but I can put a story in Sergio's backlog and say, okay, this week we got to hone in on these areas and make sure these are healthy, and we're ready for that communications campaign. So that data really drove how we pilot. And again, having that schedule, knowing how much time I can estimate for things programmatically, also helps the team plan their work. Okay, We know in June it's going to be really crazy. We can't scope other things. We need to deprioritize. And we can sell that better to our stakeholders because we can show the data. Then lastly, collaboration. We're all here to collaborate, learn from each other. And the same thing, again, I have the privilege of having worked with Serge for 10 years in our different teams to say, hey, tell me more about your experience. What are you trying to figure out? What is the business impact analysis to a department when you take away the way they've been working for 30 years, some of these folks, right? Especially our developers, right? They're trying to enable the business. They're trying to build products. They're trying to make us all money. We can't make their experience horrible. So really working with all the teams involved to understand what's the impact and what are we all trying to achieve together? Does it benefit them? Always security projects feel bad, but there are benefits. We help them work more securely. So we looked at those three things, and that really is kind of the heart of what this last 2 years on this project looked like. And we kind of sum it up in a quote that Sergio and I found out we both enjoy. Good old philosophy to end the event.
Friedrich Nietzsche, yeah. And basically to emphasize, like this, projects of this size, especially at an organization of our size, is definitely a collaborative effort because it's not just, I'm not just pushing this out just because I want to. It's a collaboration between like architecture, security, the UAM team, us, project management, the product management focused on there, as well as like feedback. We have to work with the development teams in order to get like feedback and make sure that we're not impacting the stuff that we do does not prevent them from making the money for us. And so it's the amount of collaboration that's necessary for a project of this size is a lot. And so it took us a while to get through because there was a lot of things we needed to check. We would run into issues. We had to make sure that we talked to the right teams. Sometimes we would need to reach out to Jamf for something, or for Apple, or for Microsoft in order to resolve issues. And that kind of coordination comes down to comes down to having a great project manager like Chris. If you can get yourself a Chris, I highly recommend it, by the way.
Thankfully, there's only one of me. Thank you, Serge. Yeah, truly, this has been a journey. Hopefully, we can connect with you. Would love to hear what your journey was like. What are your strategies and best practices? And this kind of template, if you will, has really served us in all of our complex projects. We're constantly shifting at Comcast, and there's always something being thrown at us, and we have to think about what's the conflict. At the end of the day, if we're leading a stakeholder call or a project call, I do get back to kind of the roots of like, we can figure this out. This isn't hard. We just got to think, and we can do it together. So thank you all for attending and your time.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, please raise your hand now. Okay, let's start from here.
When you first started doing this and you created your smart group, did you add everything you have in there now, or did you start with the basics and then amp up from there, or how did you?
So basically, we initially started this when it was conditional access in Jamf, the Jamf Intune integration. If anybody remembers that Intune was making the compliance decisions at that point, and there was literally only a handful of compliance policies available in Intune. So we started with those, and that was in our smart group. I think that was SIP enabled, firewall enabled, file vault enabled, minimum OS, and I think there was a password policy one that we weren't using, and that was it. And so we started with those. And we added
Is registered.
We added user registration. We also added has to be active in the last 30 days. I think we didn't add any of the default browsers, but like we have added other smart groups since then to that. But yeah, we started off with the basic things from Intune, just these 4 compliance policies, and then went from there.
Okay. So the second thing is, when somebody's out of compliance, don't they go get pointed to a landing page on like your device is out of compliance, and do these
Yeah,
things?
yeah. If
Your sign-in was successful, but you can't get here from here,
right,
basically,
right.
is
So,
the
yeah,
long
it's-
dialogue,
it's-
yes.
It's the Microsoft
Yeah. So
you're not
block
customizing
page,
that?
right? Like, we don't do anything custom. It's
Okay.
just
And that's a limitation on the customization. We
Right.
have had feature requests to customize that because, as Sergio mentioned, a lot of the email-enabled notifications got kind of botched in the beginning because there was a lot of concern about phishing, and it's another email that some user has to assess. So we moved away from that. Hence, why compliance.
It's really nobody reads emails. So
That too. Yeah.
So for those organizations, or for those employees that were still using grandma's computer or had devices that were very old and very ancient, but didn't have the resources to replace them, how were those handled?
For sure. In any rollout, there's always an exception group. And we do have cyber exceptions processes. So if somebody had a legitimate reason, for example, like some of the SIP populations, if it wasn't known, we did force people to go to the cyber exceptions process. Because at the end of the day, they're saying, I can't be compliant. I can't follow your hardening standards. I need to work this way. And said, well, okay, if that's the case, then you need to go and get formally approved. Because at the end of the day, we're not the approvers. So we do handle it that way to make sure we're mitigating any of that.
that's why our compliance is at like 94, 95%.
Yeah.
There are some special exception groups that we're still dealing with.
That 5%, man, it's always that 5%. DIY projects are the same way, right?
Hi, thanks. Quick question. In this whole process, where did you have the users do the register my Mac and the communications that you sent there and the workplace join key and that whole kind of steps?
So the majority of that was done. We had a separate campaign to have the users register because they're all assisting. Most of our fleet had already existing Macs, so this was something we were bringing to them later. So we had a separate campaign with like communications and set a deadline and in order to, and basically warn them that if they didn't do it by this thing, they'd have a bad time. So, so that's basically how we handled that. And then from there, it became part of our deployment process. So when we deploy machines, users get a sheet that basically tells them, do this, do this, do this. At the very end, make sure you do this. So, and obviously now that we have compliance working, if they don't do the registration piece, they're going to have a bad time.
And there's a self-service register my Mac script for that.
Okay, I have a question. I saw that you had a smart group about Entra ID incomplete registration. Could you give me a little bit of color around how you did the criterion for that? Because I have a bunch of those that I'm trying to wrangle right now.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
The incomplete, there's the Entra ID incomplete registration.
Yes.
So how was that smart group compiled? What are we checking off of on that?
So we had an extension attribute that would register that. Basically, it would just run, and we would check the machine as part of that in order to get that population. So essentially what it is that we said if it didn't return a registration complete, we considered it an incomplete registration, and then that would flag that, and we had either tell the user to re-register, or if need be, have IT touch the device to figure out what was going on. Because it might be something, because if in Entra we have like the device limitation, like most users will never ever hit the device limitation, but some will, and that will prevent registration from succeeding. As I mentioned earlier, if there's duplicate records for the same device in Entra, for the same Mac in Entra, that can also cause issues as well. So if we see that, that's not something the user can resolve, that's something we have to resolve on there. And then as soon as we clear out the stale records, or the duplicate records, usually then it's able to succeed from there. And beyond that, then, because then that's where we reach out to Jamf and say, we got this weird situation going on. Can you help us out? So.
I think you call them SPOCs. How do you manage that group?
The SPOCs, how do we manage that group?
We have a similar group where we call them canaries, where we have to, have all our phases or waves pretty much set the same, but that's the group where I find
right. So it's so what we do. From a logistics standpoint, we have a monthly SPOC call that we basically have with everybody, and they call in and we tell them what's happening with stuff like things we are intending to do, projects we're working on. From a management, endpoint management part of that, we have this group, they are a security group in Entra. So what we initially did, before we had the ability to get member of, that they recently added in Jamf Pro, what we did was essentially have a policy that was limited to that security group that would write a flag to a plist file locally on the Mac, and then we have an extension attribute to read that plist file, and if for that group, and if that was true, they got put into a smart group that was just Spock's, and so we could just target them directly for anything like that.
So as I understand, the machine has the monitor or whatever checks every 30 minutes to see if it's compliant, and if it's not compliant, an alert pops up, and they have maybe 5 days to become compliant before they're actually locked out.
Well, it's actually 24 hours for us, because that's when we expect the next, up to 24 hours, because that's when we expect the next recon to run, which would then update Jamf, and then Jamf would update Entra and say it's not compliant, and then they have a bad time.
So they only have a 24-hour lead time?
Yes, because that's the most we can do the grace period because of how device compliance works. It works on that smart group membership. So if we have the recon run at least once a day, and if they are non-compliant when that recon runs, that compliant max group gets updated because they fall into one of those groups that they shouldn't be a member of, and then they become non-compliant. Jamf then informs Entra this device is not compliant, that status gets registered in Entra, and then from there, conditional access takes it away.
So they get a notification and they have an option to become compliant.
Right, that's why compliance monitor runs every 30 minutes. So it gives them a chance to correct the problem so that they don't lose access.
Okay, so the point of my question is, inevitably when they ignore every single notification because busy,
right?
So then they get locked out. So what were you, from a project management standpoint, what is your numbers of people that said, I don't have time for this, become uncompliant, and then call in, hey, I have an important meeting and I can't join because you locked me out because I ignored the 30 notifications I got today.
Yeah, I mean,
what are the numbers you saw when you started, adopting this new?
Sure.
At this point, compliance and conditional access is business as usual for us. And in that initial, we had a lot of those kinds of tickets initially, it was just basically a lot of IT had to going around or walking people through. It's like, did you register this computer? You did not register this computer. Okay, let me help you register this computer. And like, oh, you have access now? Okay, great. Have a nice day. And then from there, as it became a more normal thing and our users expected it, then the expectation was I have to make sure that my computer is registered so I don't get this thing. So, but yes, we did get a lot. I don't have numbers around that, but I'm sure Tegan remembers how much it impacts. You have anything? You remember anything? All right. No.
They were low because
yes,
we had burned down as much as we could. So by the time we were moving to our general availability or our pilots, it was truly all the people that we knew could take action or were low risk. So we worked with a BA, business analysts on the cyber side. They were looking at every bit of data we could. Who is it? What are they using? Do they have personal and managed devices? And then we started with those low risk phases before we started putting in the people that were probably going to get the pop-up. And then we started to assess, okay, well, can we address them directly, then move on and put them into the general phases. So that's how we manage the risk.
And this is why we have a Chris. He remembers these details that I forget.
Guys, where we can find you after the session to ask more questions and have more discussions?
That's a good question. I'll be around for a little bit after a while. I'll be at the Jamf party tomorrow.
Tonight?
Tonight.
Like
tonight. I don't know. What day is it today?
Yeah.
I don't know what it's
Wednesday. We'll be out in the hallway. If you
We'll
want
be
to
in the
chat some more, we'll go wait in the
hallway,
hallway. Yeah.
Yes, like I'm
Thanks,
around
everybody.
wherever.
Thank
You
you,
can
and
find me- you can
give
find me
one
on
more round of applause.